Hello. Stream starting soon? Yes. I think this is number 7 in this series. Hello? I had to start counting number of streams I've done in this series because I almost forgot to upload the archive of them to YouTube. And when I did that, I remembered that, yeah, most people want to see a different title for each video. Otherwise, like, which order do you watch it in? How do I arrange it in a playlist later? That kind of thing. So I started numbering them and like, oh, I've already done 6. And this is number 7. So, welcome back. This is the extent to what I've been playing around with. So, using wgpu and egui and various integration libraries, we have spinning cube being drawn. I haven't really changed the look of what we're doing in the last stream. I think maybe we'll get to changing some of that today. But I do want to start with like just doing a quick pass over the code to see if I maybe should refactor a little bit more. Actually, I just thought of one thing I do want to do. So a little bit more refactoring, and then maybe go straight to trying to pull in the physics library, rapier, to give this some actual real physics. See about that. Actually, would be nice is to before we put the physics engine in, to have camera controls. So either click and drag or maybe just some sliders to move the camera around. Because I imagine that if this cube starts bouncing around, we're going to want to watch the cube with our camera. All right. And of course, our guest star is back. All right, I'm going to sit right there, waiting for chat. You want to face the camera? No? Shy? Okay, I think refactoring this main.rs is a task because we're at 877 lines. That's pretty long. I've already split things up. One thing that could just go is this app, especially because it has an inner struct, which is intended to be private. So, don't put around my cable. That, getting licks. But at least I'm not getting bites. All right. Yeah, so let's move this into like an app.rs. Hey, no. If you're naughty, I'm going to put you on the ground. Won't be allowed to get up on the table. Just play with cables. All right, so let's make a new app.rs. So from the main, we have to declare it right up here with the list of modules. Okay, now we're free to pull it in. She's playing around with the cables when she knows I'm not looking. I think also the model stuff can move out. All right, there she goes. Oh, she's going into the other camera. You can see the camera overlap. Okay. So everything from inner down through the app. Oh, hit the wrong key. I have to keep holding down shift there. Okay, so cut that out. Go over to app and paste. All right. It's gonna be a matter of like importing everything now, right? Well, why don't we move model? Let's not move model. Just do an import crate model will do, right? So this is a matter of importing all the things that we're missing. I don't like how it puts spaces there by default. I think it looks nicer like that. All right. Import ref cell, import abstract window. A lot of things to import. Instant duration, info overlay. I think actually I want to move that out of here. We're going to be passing that in. This is a different concern completely. This is how we draw our overlay, like labels, buttons, spinner. Doesn't really belong here in the redraw factory. My bot says 16 people are viewing, but no one has done any chatting. And so that no one has been first to chat yet. Why did I do that? Why is it giving me an error here? Yeah, why can't I import it? Okay. Oh, and develop it's first. Yes, I am totally happy. Thank you. I'm like, someone's got to be first. Sacrificing your lurker status for being first. I appreciate the sacrifice. Okay, yeah, these models really don't belong in app, right? Maybe they do. But I'll have to think about that. The goal with the refactoring and splitting the different files is like, so each file should have, in general, its own set of responsibilities that that don't cross into other files. So separation of responsibilities. Single responsibility principle is what we want to aim for, where there's just one responsibility for everything. Listening on your work PC, you're not logged into Twitch, so you have to use your phone to send messages back to lurking. Okay. Well, thank you for being first. Hope your work goes well. If you're not able to watch, it's a good thing you're watching my stream, right? Because I tend to be very, very chatty and just describing what oh, that's the problem. Yeah, me chatting and talking about what I'm doing probably helps, right? Let's see. Okay, so we're using a lot of things from the overall crate. So this is probably going to be our hints about where responsibilities are crossing. Yeah, so a lot of these are functions that probably just should be moved into the app because they're sort of captive functions. Okay, so we want our app to be the public one, facing one. We want the new and what else? Redraw and resize. These to be the public facing interface of the app. Private, create abstract window, and public interface. Okay, so interesting that I have to declare the abstract interface as a public, but okay. I don't think that in a trait that's public, you have to mark every method as public. I think that that can just be, they can just be left alone. Oh. All right, I'm just making sure I've removed all the app struct and its methods out. Now just make sure that everything still builds without warnings or errors. Oh, interesting. I wasn't getting this before. Oh, right. When you start making things public, then Clippy Pedantic starts telling you if you're missing documentation. So I'm going to suppress those for now. I'm going to say that we're allowing missing doc errors, but I'm going to put a to do here. We need 2 slashes or 3. Two is probably good enough. To do need documentation of public interfaces. Hey there, Crouch. Will you release this code in case someone doesn't understand? I would if I could, but the job I have right now does not let me work on open source, games, or anything work related. So the open source thing is sort of a sticking point. I would have to get permission to share the code. It's just a company policy they have. So that's probably not going to happen because it's such a long process, and I think they'd have to review every line of code, which should be just be a waste of time. Saw a cat cam on VODs. Yeah, there's a cat cam, but there's no cat in front of it right now. See, it's right there, right there. Cat did jump in front a little bit ago. The cat we got, this Calico, she's like 7 months old. She's just everywhere. Not like my old cat who would just pick a spot and sit there for hours and hours, and I could position a camera and have people stare at him. This one moves every like 10 minutes. And it does not want to sleep in this room actually at all anymore. She's always out elsewhere in the house. What's this warning I'm getting? Private trait. Okay, that's this other trait. It has to be public as well. Okay. Any more warnings? Nope, no more warnings to errors. So let's run it and make sure it still works. I guess I can go a quick run through based off of what you're saying, Crouch, that you don't understand this code at all. I can give some really high level overview. So this is, I shouldn't have closed that so quickly. This is what we're actually doing in the program. We're drawing a rotating cube with the background being blue and a green strip of ground underneath, and there's some user interface elements up here. User interface elements we're doing in egui. The rest of it we're just going directly to wgpu draw calls. wgpu being sort of like an abstraction over OpenGL, Vulkan, Metal, WebGL, all of those different things. So we could run this program on a lot of different graphics backends, including a browser, and it should look and behave the same way. And how we get other libraries, stuff like egui on top, there's through other integration libraries. So there's like, this is egui, what it looks like in the browser, by the way. There's egui, and then there's egui wgpu, which is how you integrate egui with wgpu. And then there's egui winit, which is how you get egui onto the window provider itself. And let's see, what else do we have? That's winit. I don't think I have any other browser windows open that cover integration libraries. So why am I doing this? This is just to play around with the libraries. A spinning simple piece of geometry like this is what you call like the hello world of low-level graphics programming. Usually the first thing you do when you learn a graphics library is draw a triangle. That's generally the easiest thing to do. And then you graduate, so to speak, to 3D. So from our main, everything starts in main in Rust. So what our main does is I've pulled away different aspects of what main does into different functions. So the first one is set up logging. Not really much other than this. It sets up the infrastructure for printing out this log message stream that you see in the background. Parsing our command line arguments, because one command line argument we have is we get to pick which window implementation we want. Do we want winit or full tick? I've been showing winit, but we also have a full tick backend. Because you can choose which backend you want at runtime, we have to construct the actual backend based off of what you choose. So if you choose winit, we create a winit window. If you choose full tick, then it goes to get a full tick window. And these are little concrete implementations of an abstraction, which looks like this. So both of those implementations have to implement all of these. So it has to be able to create a surface on demand, and a surface is the object that you represents the drawing area. Event loop is what you call to once everything is set up to start drawing regularly on schedule, width and height of the window. And then there's the context and integration layer for the egui, which is that overlay with the buttons and labels. Context sort of holds on to anything that's persistent, like the state of the GUI, and integration is another abstraction, which is actually pretty simple, which is to go to the either full tick or winit and get the current set of window events that have happened since the last time we asked. So an egui raw input, I think if we go in there, we can see what they are. Yeah, like events. Like, did the user do a cut or copy or paste? Or did they type in some text? Did they press a key? Did they move the mouse? Did they press a mouse button? Those kinds of things. Okay, so going back, a lot of the work I did yesterday was to put the rest of the program into this app. So there's an app new, and then you can ask the app for functions that need that to call whenever we need to redraw or whenever we resize the window, and we give those to the event loop. Let me show you what event loop is in winit. Event loop. So generally we're running a function over and over again. So event loop is given a closure, which is like an anonymous function that it runs, it calls like whenever there's some new event or a timer is expired, and it'll give us what event happened. So the event could be that we need to redraw the window, or it could be that the time of the next draw, like refresh, has been reached. I don't know why, but winit has a really long name for that. It could be that a window event happened. That's like mouse moved or someone clicked a button. And there are other events, but obviously I'm not handling them. All the other events are being ignored, right? A couple of specific window events are if the window is resized. If we change the scale factor, so that might change if you drag the window between a retina display and a non-retina. There, Nightshade dude. Or if you ask to close the window, so if you click the X at the top right. So when you see like request redraw, we're asking the window level to, hey, generate a redraw requested event. And we do that sort of to be polite in that the window layer might have its own stuff it needs to do whenever a window is requested to be redrawn. So we ask nicely. And when it comes back and tells us that a redraw was requested by someone, it could be us, it could be someone else, then we redraw. And redraw is a function that is given to this event loop. So going back, right? This is the redraw is provided by the app. So if I click into that, you can see when we generate a dynamic, like on the heap function object. That's what this means. Box means that the object is on the heap rather than the stack or the data segment. Dyne means it's some implementation that's only known at runtime, not compile time, of a trait object. So this trait object is a function object which takes no arguments and returns a duration, right? So the point is that when we redraw, we're just say it's just going to be no arguments. It's like just redraw. And when we get back is the time at which we should draw again the next time. So if it's like a regular like 10 frames per second, the duration will be 100 milliseconds, right? So what do we do to generate this boxed function? we make a closure here that we move into it all of the variables we need. So it takes ownership of all the variables that we referenced, like wrapper and app start and all that stuff, right? And before that, we set up some of the variables that are going to be needed so that they get moved in automatically. And essentially what we're doing is we're saying, telling the app, please redraw using this information overlay. And by the way, here's the time that we recorded when we started at the beginning. We use that to measure time since the program was started for anything that's time sensitive, right? So go into this read. Well, first let me show you the info overlay because that's pretty easy to understand. This is that if I run the program again, these UI elements up here drawn in egui, we represent them in sort of like as commands here. So to this thing called the UI. So like one command is label. We say make a label, make another label, make a button, and if it was just clicked, do this. Make another label, make a spinner, right? It's all imperative instead of being declarative. Instead of declaring a label, we command it to generate a label. So every frame that we draw, we're recomposing the entire UI from scratch. There's very little state that's held. This self count is one piece of state, and the context of egui is another piece of state, but that's managed elsewhere. Hey there, Dr. Padawan. So things like what font to use and the size are all sort of like tacked on to the objects that we're commanding the UI to make into a label. And whenever you see this kind of pattern where you make something new and then you start having function calls tacked onto the end, that's called the builder pattern, by the way. So if we're building a certain state for a text field. So first, we give the string that we want to show, and then building onto that, we attach what font we want, and then we attach the fact that we want it in bold or strong type, right? And at every step, we could stop here. Some builders have like a final like finish or build function that turns the builder into like an immutable built object, but in this example here, it's just one and the same. So at any point, we could stop. I could comment this out and it still works, it just isn't strong anymore. Okay, going back a little bit more. Redraw. Okay. Here's where things get pretty complicated, so no worries if you don't get all of this, but at a very high level, we're recording what the current time is. Then we take that and subtract it from the when the app started, and that tells us how much time has elapsed, so we could use that in some calculations. I set up rendering text, rendering graphics in general to the surface, which is again, it's the drawing area, and device is our handle to the GPU in general for getting graphics objects. What we get back out from render setup is we get a texture that we're going to draw to, a view into that texture, and then an encoder for drawing commands. Then we're updating our statistics about frames per second, and we're taking a report of that and giving it to the overlay. And then we're also measuring the average rendering time using an averaging window. Then process egui goes and takes that overlay that we looked at, and using that with the context and integration layers of egui, it generates the output for egui. And that's, in general, what textures to draw on the screen and where exactly to draw them, like what shapes. Like when I say shapes and textures, what I mean is when we're actually drawing stuff, and let me pause until this starts running. The text up here is actually a series of triangles all put together to make one big rectangle. And then the actual letters that you see are picked out of a texture atlas is one way to do it, or they're actually drawn with even finer detail with geometry that covers the actual curves of the fonts. I don't know what egui does in this case, but I tell it to draw a label, and it ends up giving me a bunch of shapes that describe where on the screen to put this text, and then the texture is like how to paint in those shapes to actually show this text. That's all generated here in process egui. Then these update textures and update buffers are moving that information over the GPU. Okay. Then we're drawing our cube and our ground here. So we're first rotating the cube. So we're taking the current angle, which is based off of the amount of time that's passed, and generating, like, updating the rotation of the cube, and then we're drawing those things. Actually, I should probably go into draw, because drawing is we have to ask the GPU command encoder to start a render pass. Then with that render pass, we draw our 3D models, and then we tell egui to do its rendering. Drawing our 3D models is we go to a model renderer for the ground and the cube, and we tell them to draw. Draw is we set the pipeline, which is like the description of how we're going to do the drawing, and in the render pass, and then we upload the geometry of what we're drawing. So vertex and index buffers hold on to like where what points in space and what colors to attach to those points. And here I'm doing a bunch of math to turn like how big, how much to rotate, and where to move the cube, for example, into a matrix that we upload to the GPU here. And then draw index says, okay, take everything we just set up and just go do it. Just draw the thing. So a bunch of that's not going to make any sense unless you've maybe had an intro of some graphics library like OpenGL, and then it might make a bit of sense. There's a unique spin on it, is that this is all in wgpu. So things like a render pipeline and a render pass, those are specific terms for wgpu that you might not be familiar with if maybe you've only looked at OpenGL, for example. Okay, and then once we've done all our drawing, it actually doesn't get drawn immediately. It gets queued up for the GPU to draw. So we flush the queue by telling the queue to submit everything the encoder made. So tell the encoder to finish, take that thing and give it to the queue, submit. That does all the drawing, and then output present goes to the output texture and says present that on screen. Then we go free any textures we don't need anymore from egui. And here's where I take another snapshot of the current time, and that's how we get like how long it took to draw everything. Is we take the current time and subtract it from when we started rendering. That's how this elapsed, what that does. And then the next time we draw, we're going to use that information to say how fast drawing takes. And then we say we want to be repainted after the amount of time that the egui told us it needed to be repainted. There's 715209. So all of that to draw this. That's the basic framework for drawing both the egui stuff and our own 3D stuff. The structure isn't going to change much now that I have it set up. What's going to change is we're going to make the scene more complex, and we're going to move the GUI stuff around. So hopefully the complexity of the scene and the GUI are separated from this code. This code doesn't change. It's just if we go into here and I delve down deeply enough, this will change because we'll draw more models, right? And then the things that are inside these models will change. So the geometry, the number of instances, those things will change. And for the egui stuff, this overlay, we would change it here and not back in the other place where we were doing the drawing. So one goal of refactoring code is to separate it so that the different functions and different files of your program take over specific things, and they're the only things that are responsible for what they take over. Separation of concerns, right? So if I have two different files of my program that are both reaching into the same variable, then that's where I need to question, like, do we have a responsibility that's split two ways, right? I don't need to update Chrome. Close that. And also, in general, if files get too long, then I want to split them. So I got this down to 641 lines. It's sort of still too long, so I kind of want to move stuff out. I think this model stuff. Oh wait, no, these functions like render setup, I think is only used from the app now. Yeah, render setup there is only used up here, so it should just move. It should go with the app. I should probably just take everything that's mentioned at the top of app that's a function, these ones, and move them in. So render setup, make screen descriptor, probably process egui also. Yep. Free unused textures. Yep. Start render pass. Yeah. Yeah. So all of those should move. Just cut that out of main and paste them into app. At the bottom, I guess. And then I could just remove these because they're no longer imported from the crate. And this needs to be imported probably. Okay, and then the main doesn't need to have these imports anymore. That's what these yellow lines are. They're like basically saying, you don't need this anymore. Unused import. Jesse Spy 2, how are you doing? So I know this stuff is hard to follow along, especially if you haven't watched me build this code up. So I'll try to go over stuff as I'm working on it. If there's anything specific that like I'm really not explaining well, let me know. Setup logging is what the main calls. That's the only function the main calls, right? Everything else is now in the app. But okay, wgpu init is only called from the app, right? Find all references. Yep, so it should move in with the app as well. Cut from main, go to the app and paste. Anyhow should be imported. So should info. Anyhow is weird because it's a macro, so when I do like the hint, it gets confused about what I want. So I usually have to go up here and fix it by just saying use anyhow. So the first one is what library, and the second one is the thing from the library. So that's the principal object from the anyhow library, called the same thing as the module. All you know about coding is things break if you forget to close the bracket. That is true. If I forget to close that bracket, look at all the things that broke. Look at all those red lines. If you see a bunch of red lines, usually if you go near the top, you'll find the thing that you're missing. Sometimes the compiler will help you and say what you're missing. Unclosed delimiter. There we go. It's helping. In fact, sometimes it'll even automatically close it for you so you don't make that mistake. A lot of window editors have, or a lot of code editors will have like a neat feature where if there's a lot of like parentheses in a row, let me try to find one of those. Like right here, they're either color matched, or if you see, if I move the cursor around, it's putting a little box around the matching pair. So if I put the cursor there, it's the blue ones, and then the pink ones, and the yellow ones. Highly recommend if you're working on coding with a lot of nested delimiters like parentheses and braces and brackets, that you have whatever editor setting turned on or what plugin you need to do that, because otherwise it can be a real mess sometimes to try to find out, like, do I not have enough parentheses like that? Then you start to see, oh, well, that matches that, but it shouldn't, because this stuff should be matching over here. Another thing that you should start to think about when you have a lot of overlap or like nested parentheses and stuff is breaking it down. So I could do something like where I could take this and give it a name, like context ref, we would say let context ref equals that. So that works too, but it's one set of parentheses is removed from this line. So the cost is that we had to pick a name. So we have to pick a name and then we have to use it, which means there's some separation of code between this line and this line, right? But they're dependent on each other. They both have to have this name in it. So like a lot of things in programming, there are trade-offs, advantages and disadvantages, right? You might find that breaking it up this way is nicer. Sometimes the name can help people understand what the thing is, what this inner thing is. In this case, it's a reference to a context, right? So the window init, wnit window new needs a reference to a context. So giving a name might help you understand what's going on there. Without the name, the code is all self-contained and there's only one line of it, but it might not be immediately obvious. Why are we cloning the context? It's actually we're cloning a reference, so we're giving a new reference to a shared context to the new function. Naming things is difficult, but necessary. Only coding done is modding Terraria. Hey, that's pretty nice. I wish I knew how to mod Terraria. All right, so still trying to cut down. Oh, we could probably remove this to do, right? Because there aren't a whole lot of lines in main anymore. That's nice. I'm still trying to cut the size of this file down. I think the last step is to move all the models out. Models and then these vertex attributes and instance uniforms. Those go with the model, right? Like if I go to vertex attributes and say final references, it's going to be just all within the model stuff. Yeah. You did get him. Can't think of a nice username. I'll just pick a random number. Do I know C#? Yeah, but I haven't written anything in C# in a few years, so I'm probably a little rusty. Actually, that's what Rust official book recommends. RC clone rather than clone because it's ambiguous. Okay, so did I just mistype something? I did. Okay. So when I have a clone like that, they recommend doing RC clone. And then remove this clone. So like that. And then we're wait, why are we borrowing a cloned reference? Oh, need to be there. Really? RC clone takes a reference? It does. Or it has to, yeah. We don't want it to consume the original reference. But see, here there's a trade-off, right? I had to put an explicit borrow there, whereas without RC clone, just calling clone, I didn't need to do an explicit reference. It just did it implicitly. Keyboard. Whoa, I made this. Check out that video to see how it was done. That was my project last year. And I make a lot of typing mistakes because I've only been using this keyboard since I made it a year ago. And it's hard to fight like 25 years of previous keyboard mechanical, or like, what do you call it? Where it's all like trained over the years. Muscle memory, that's it. Fighting 25 years of muscle memory of QWERTY style keyboards to learn how to use my own keyboard. But I like challenges. Okay, let's make a model. Model or models? What models? Back in main, we need to declare this module. Models. See how cool this is? It automatically sorts them. If I put it up here, it automatically moves it back down there. That's one of the things I like about the plugins I'm using with VS Code. Hey there, C17R. Sure Shack 55, long time no see you as well. Okay, we made a module for models, so I can move all the model stuff out of here, right? And it begins up here. We're just going to take all of this and move it to the models, including the renderer. Just cut that code. Go to models, hit paste, save. Then we fix up all the imports. So offset of comes from, which one of these does it come from? I don't remember. Find out. Comes from mem offset. Does that mean I really don't need mem offset anymore if it comes from standard mem now? One thing to think about. Maybe look into to do. Do we still need mem offset if standard mem provides this? Let's close this. That's a question to answer later. Multiple providers of the type means that maybe you have some redundancy in your dependencies. So I'm going through and I'm basically saying that these things come from libraries, and either you need to be explicit, which means qualify as, or you can go ahead and import, which is, it adds a statement at the top of the file saying, we're pulling in this name from this library path, right? Buffer init descriptor comes from a library called wgpu and a submodule inside of wgpu called util. So because I copied it from one module to the other, I didn't copy the module references. I have to fix that up. Another way to do this would be to copy all of the uses from here and just paste them into models, and then to delete the ones we don't need anymore. This one is wrong. So now we just follow the all yellow lines, which are unused imports, and we just delete them. Log. This stuff can go, whoops, too much. Instance and surface can go. All right. So now our main should be pretty small, especially when I remove its imports. Another sign that you might want to refactor your code is if you have too many imports. It means you have too many dependencies. You increase fragility when you have too many dependencies, because any one of those dependencies changes, it breaks you. Why does public class name mean? You probably saw that back in models or app or something like that. Ooh, I broke stuff. Pub class, or it would be pub struct in Rust, right? Okay, you're probably talking about C#, right? So Stripe Monkey already answered it. The Rust equivalent of that would be something like this, where instead of class, it's struct, which is in C#. I think you can also have structs, right? They're like classes, only a language that has class usually means it's a structure that's held onto by reference rather than being something owned on the stack, right? It's really just a distinction of where it is in memory and how you can share it or you can't share it. But in Rust, usually things are always struct, and to add on the concepts of class, you would do something like, let me find it. That would be in app, right? Oh, no, not app. WNIT host. Yeah, let me collapse some of these things. So here's a public structure called WNIT window. Its functions are inside of an impl WNIT window. But hey, there's a second impl for WInit window, but it has some extra words here. What the heck is that? This is the Rust equivalent of saying public struct WInit window colon abstract window. And it's basically saying it's a public type. Struct or class means that it's a complex type. It has many values in it. It's not just a single value. And then the name of it. And then the colon and another name is in Rust, it would be an implementation of something else for that thing, which means that this is an interface and we are implementing that interface. So if the interface here consists of these functions, you have to have these functions to implement the interface. Then this implementation of the interface for that type has the bodies of all of those required functions. So Jesse Spy, the equivalent in Rust would be you'd have pub struct tmmc basic item, and then somewhere else you'd have impl mod item for tmmc basic item. And it's saying that we're making a new type called tmmc basic item, and it implements an interface called mod item. So somewhere else there'll be a specification for mod item, and it'll say what all things that implement mod item have to have this list of functions. And then in tmmc basic item, there will be the bodies of all of those required functions that you could think of it as the interface mod item is somewhere else in the program. The code accepts any mod item, right? Well, for tmmc basic item to be plugged in there, it has to implement what mod item requires. So you implement what mod item's requirements are for tmmc basic item, and then you're allowed to take a tmmc basic item and plug it in wherever a mod item is needed. So is this a weird thing to be learning assembly? No. There are actually some other streams out there where they do nothing but assembly coding. In fact, if you want to write a program for the Nintendo, like the original 8-bit Nintendo, you'd be writing it in 6502 assembly. And we have the streamer on Twitch who actually does that live, so it is totally not weird. The other place you'd be learning ASM would be if you want to optimize some very, very complex, time-consuming task that is consisting of a loop that does something millions of times per second. A lot of people will optimize the inner core of that loop to be in assembly to make it as fast as possible. While you're learning SNES modding, right? That's probably why you're doing assembly. It's not weird at all then. I don't do assembly in my context because I'm at a much higher level from that. We are many levels removed from assembly. I think we're 3 levels or at least removed from that. Okay, by moving the models out, I broke the app because these things are no longer from the crate, right? They're from the model. So a trick I could do here is I could just copy this and then just say use model, crate model. And then those things, so model instance, model render, cube, all that stuff. And then delete these red lines now. Models. Okay, and it's going to tell me you can't import them because they're private, right? So we can click on those, I think. No, it's not going to let me do it. I have to go and open up what needs to be public here. So that needs to be public. That needs to be public. Be public. That. The new function for model has to be public. Model instance needs to be public. The at position, scaled and all that. The renderer, its draw function, its new function. Okay, what else? FPS measurement seconds. Oh, does that actually go in the crate? Yes. Okay, so now we're good. Oh, no, there's one error. It's in here somewhere. More than one error. Okay, so the model's instances is private. So rather than giving direct access to this, just the idea of encapsulation is that although the structure is public, we want to keep its components private. The way you do that is you'd add a method of model that allows the outside of the model to a way to add to the instances. So it'd be like a public function add instance. And you'd pass in a model instance, or instance, which is of type model instance. And the way you'd implement it is to just say self. Oh, actually, I forgot to have the self. You need a mutable reference. In other words, self needs to be changeable because we're going to go to the self.instances and append. Oh, it's push back, right? Push, just push instance. Okay, so and then back here, instead of doing instances push directly, we do cube model add instance. Otherwise, though, it stays the same, right? So add instance takes the place of instances dot push. I guess it's a pain when you can't edit the base and need to basically grab off the uneditable spine of code. That's one type of implementation, but that wouldn't really be called interface implementation. Like, I should have said inheritance, right? That's one type of inheritance, but that's not implementation. Interface inheritance. That's what is it called? Base class derived class inheritance. And I don't do much of that because I prefer composition over inheritance. You have no idea what the spine of code is? I'm guessing it's the base class. So Jesse Spy is probably taking some existing class and he wants to replace some of the parts of it. So one way to do that would be if the original base class is designed for being overridden in parts. So they're virtual or they're overridable functions that you can derive a subtype and replace some of those functions. You want to code, but you don't know where to start. If you want to learn it for SNES modding, I'd suggest following a tutorial or a streamer who is already doing it and watch what they do and ask questions. That's one way to start. Other one would be look up a YouTube video where someone gives you an intro to SNES modding and then watch that intro. Lots of ways to learn how to start. You could just ask questions, but in general, it depends on your learning style. How do you learn best? Do you want to read a book? Do you want to follow someone's examples? Do you want someone to teach you? Like if someone asks me, how do they learn like the programming language I'm doing, Rust, right? I'd say go to rust-lang.org and click the learn button, and then there are 3 paths. Do you have reached a fork in the road? Do you wish to read a book, follow a course, or just look at code examples? So depending on your learning style, you pick the approach. You stare at Notepad++, you don't know where to start when making something. That means you need a fresh perspective. Ask someone else. And it's best to ask someone who's already doing what you want to do. So since I don't know anything about SNES modding or Terraria modding, I'm not a really great person to ask. General coding, though, a good place to start would be any tutorial on things that you're interested in. So, for example, like the graphic stuff I'm doing, I went to, I just did a Google search for wgpu learn. And the very first link was introduction, learn wgpu. And why did I know wgpu? Because another streamer was coding it and I thought it was cool, right? So you just read through this and it'll tell you exactly what to do. You can just copy the code, and hopefully, if it's a good intro or a good learning thing, they'll explain what everything's doing. So this is all explaining what we're doing, right? If you get lost, then it's probably too complex of an intro, and you kind of want to step back and pick something easier. Like if I didn't know what Rust was, I'd probably first learn Rust, and then once I learned enough Rust, I'd come back to this thing saying, okay, now we can use Rust to do GPU stuff. Was it Togglerbit who was using wgpu? No, it was someone else. I think it was Musin. Or it might have been, no, egui was what Musin was using, and then wgpu, I think someone in chat, one of you guys suggested that I use it. Back when I was doing WebGL. I think one of you said, why are you doing this in WebGL? Why don't you use wgpu? That was probably one of my viewers who suggested Conway's Game of Life is a very fun thing to start with. Yeah, there you go. Conway's Game of Life is a very simple set of rules, right? But there you go. Start. So how this works, they're very simple rules, but you can do some really fun things with it. Needed to stop in order to paint. Start. Ah, it stabilized too quickly. I'm not very good at making things that blow up. How about that? Oh, it died. Isn't the classic one you just make a line and then it blows up? There we go. So you can make fun simulations just out of a basic set of rules. Here are the rules. Each cell with one or no neighbors dies. Each cell with 4 or more neighbors dies. Each cell with 2 or 3 survives. The space that's empty becomes populated if it has 3 neighbors. So all the rules fit on one page, and then coding that, the goal is to make something pretty cool, right? So I can see how it would be very enjoyable. Back to that page. I don't know why, but I wanted to bookmark that brown colors. I actually don't need that anymore. Let's close that tab. Close some of these things I don't need. All right, I'm chasing down errors, right? Ah, updating rotation. So we're reaching into the model and changing its rotation. So we don't want to do that anymore. Model instance, if it's mutable, we can just add that, right? Rotated. And we express the rotation as a unit quaternion. So I guess I'm continuing that trend. Oh, too many words that say rotation. And then back here, this becomes instances 0 dot rotated. Oh, we can't do that though, because cube model. Oh no, we do own it. Do we own it? No, we only have mutable reference. So it's already built, so I can't do it that way. Update rotation. So this would take a mutable self. Doesn't return self anymore. Okay, and then this just says update rotation. And did I remember to mark it as public? Like I did. I did. So what is this problem? Oh, right. This instances itself is private. So I guess right now I'll just cheat and put a to-do here. Because I need to decide how do we allow the model, the instances within a model to be changed. Make a better interface to encapsulate this. Why is this an error? Oh, because vertex attributes needs to be public. That was it. Okay, so be able to run this now. You're planning on making a video game once you've learned wgpu? No, and if I was, I wouldn't be able to stream it because that's one of the three conditions of being able to stream while working at the company that I'm working at now. Can't make video games, can't do open source, and it can't be work related. So what I was hoping to do with learning these libraries is just play around with simulations. So that's why I'm thinking about adding Rapier to this program, which is a physics simulation or physics engine. I want to give this cube some actual physical properties and have it bounce around, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But I'm just learning these libraries. I'm practicing stretching those muscles, so to speak, with Rust because I don't use that at work, but I like the language. Okay, so how far have we accomplished? Ooh, so we got down to 103 lines. So at the beginning of the day, it was 800 lines, right? So this is good. The main program is nice and concise now. I'm thinking that the abstractions should go in their own file, right? Maybe call it backend, or I don't know, maybe keep them in main for now. This probably doesn't go here. Yeah, that goes with the app, so let's move it. This too, I guess. Yeah, that goes with the app. What about this one? That one goes with its neighbor. So does that. So these all go with the app. App might be getting too big. We'll see. So those constants go. I like to put constants after the dependency imports and before any local structure definitions. So we'll remove these. It actually has an error because of max. Oh, this needs max draw rate. Ah, okay. So max draw rate, we should move back to the top level then, because it's shared. So put it back there, and then I don't remember. Do I have to make it? I don't have to make it public because descendant modules don't need it to be public, right? We just import directly from the crate. Right, there we go. So we're importing directly from the crate this max draw rate. So does app. It also imports it from the crate there. And there's where we declare it. And what do you do at work? I can't talk about that. It's one of the conditions. Can't talk about work. Those rules sound insane. Why is open source forbidden? It's not forbidden. It just has to go through an approval process to make sure it's not a conflict of interest. And the approval process is like absurdly slow. Like it would take probably a year, and they'd have to review all the code, and then they have to sign off saying, okay, you can release this. It's just some companies are just kind of weird that way. Yeah, it's depends on your legal jurisdiction, Tinspin. So it's also a lot of companies are like the one I'm at is at will employment, so they set the rules. You don't like the rules, you don't have to work there. I kind of like having a job and getting paid, so as long as the rules are what I can live with, then I'm fine with it. So my feeling about it is that eventually I'll retire, right? When I retire, then there we go. Open source. I can finally do it, right? That's probably something I'll do to keep myself busy. Yeah, sorry I can't talk about work. That's just one of the things I'm supposed to avoid. Okay, so we're down to just defining our max draw rate, which is 60 frames per second. We define our back-end interfaces, the abstract window and the egui integration. We have an enumerated type for what kind of implementation. We have our command line arguments. We have the code that parses the argument, sets up logging, makes the context, selects a window type, implementation, creates the implementation, and then starts the app with those things. I like it. Do you still code at work, or are you in a management role? Country roads. Sorry, you're trying to get me to talk about work, but I can't do that. I think all I can really say is that I have a job, and the job is doing stuff that is uh, nothing I stream. That's okay. No harm, no foul. I just can't talk about it. I could talk about what I used to do. I coded for 23 years at Qualcomm, and it was mostly in C++, and it was for making tools. So they had a big bunch of layoffs, and so right near the end of working there, I was watching other coding streamers and thinking, I've always wanted to do that. Let me give it a try. And I actually started streaming a little bit while I was still working there. Then I got laid off. I'm like, oh, cool. Now I can just put all my time into streaming. And I did that for several years. I was making a game. And then when I got a job offer at a new company, I looked into, can I still stream? And was like, there are restrictions. And at first I didn't know what to stream. And then I figured I can make videos about Rust. I can build this keyboard, which I made on stream last year. I can do Advent of Code, and I can do like educational stuff in Rust, like learning things. I know, Stripe Monkey. It's so fancy. In fact, it has, look at that. It has extra thanks to on the bottom of the keyboard here. And would you know it? There's a Stripe Monkey on that list. Yep. Why am I keeping these around? Maybe just delete them. This was an attempt to like abstract this stuff away, because these, I think I'm going to end up just, if I wanted to condense this down, it would be with the macro, not with a generic. So I think we give up on trying to do this one. Main is done. Models, how big is models? Kind of big. The renderer is separate from the actual models. I kind of tempted to split this between like the actual model, the description and how to draw it. Right, there's a nice division between them. Should I go ahead and do that? It's a good way to show how you make submodules. So you have to make a folder called models. And inside of that, you would make a module called like renderer. And in models, you would say mod. So this is a submodule of models called renderer. Ignore that. And then I'd find the renderer here. This guy. And I move him. So cut, paste, save. I can go back to models and take all my imports and clone them. Put them in the renderer. Save. Model is from super. For these. Close this now. So the shader needs to be moved into render to match. So just click and drag that. Yes, move it, please. Thank you. Now it's happy again. Okay. Vertex attributes from super. And then delete all the imports we don't need anymore. So delete that, those two, these two, at one, and that one. And we're not using mem offset here. Delete that line. Delete that. Cool. So we have our renderer. The app needs to move this now in render, which is private. To fix that, I got to go to models, make this a public module. Or actually, what would be better is to to re-export it. So make it available from models by going to models and say pub use render model render. That's a re-export, right? So now app is fine with it. If I click it, it goes directly to the renderer, but it went through this re-export. Okay, still need that. Those three, that one, and these four. And go. I am a hardcore Rust dev. I agree. I love Rust. I am so rusted nowadays. Do you have any opinions on introspection reflection in Rust? I think that there are some things I would like to see in the language or the standard library that currently I have to pull in third-party libraries for, like ByteMuck. Is that count as introspection or reflection? It's basically saying I want to use this structure and have a view into it of just bytes. The ByteMuck pod does that, right? And zeroable means that I can just instantiate this. I can make a structure of this type and just fill it with 0 bytes, right? It would be cool if that was built into the standard library. Stuff like this mem size of, that's a bit of reflection and introspection, right? Because it's taking a type and saying, well, let me actually, does this still, this might not even count also introspection or reflection. It would be nice, it would be nicer if there was more stuff in Rust with introspection and reflection, because then I wouldn't have to repeat the type here. I had to say the type of the of each column of the matrix is array of 4 floats, where it would have really been nice to have it go back to transform and say size of that thing, right? I do have to split it into 4 columns, but that's unrelated to Rust. That's a limitation of wgpu. So there you go. I wish there was more ability to do reflection at compile time. I hate having to be redundant about the type. This F32, if I change that to a 64, then I have to remember to go to all these other 32s and change them to 64s also. It would be great if I didn't have to do that. If it just like automatically, if I could tell it to look at transform and pick out the things I need from it, like the site. Well, here's one thing that's sort of like introspection, right? By using the word self, it knows that we're using self within the context of this impulse, so that's the type we care about. Band-aided by proc macros. Yeah, it'd be cool if it was, there's more built-in stuff. You're compiling, so Tinspin, you're compiling your 3D MMO to this little computer now? What little computer is that? Wow. What kind of computer is that? Is that a dev board? It's got a massive heatsink on it. The heatsink is sort of covering what it is. All right, then where was I? Renderer, right? What's it suggesting that I do? I guess I should call it render. It's what we would call the principal class, right? But I don't want it to be called render out here. Or where was it? App. Yeah, so let me, can I undo? Yeah. I'd rather at the model level rename it when I do the re-export. So use render as model renderer. Yeah, that's what I want to do. So then in here, rename it only. So out here retains the name model renderer. The app uses model render. Cool. So RISC-V Vision 5. Never heard of that. That's pretty cool. On the left is a Raspberry 4. Okay, I couldn't quite make it out. That's cool. Why do you need a heatsink on the Raspberry 4 though? That thing doesn't really get that hot, does it? Coming from C++, you kind of like that Rust does not make most stuff built in, but rather gives tools to generate the code for that, because in C++ some bad decisions made it into the language and they now forever have to support it. Yeah, that's sort of a drag. Some people want postfix match in Rust. You'd much rather just have postfix macros and have everyone decide for themselves what they want to make shorthands for. Okay. Yeah. I like keeping things simple and not pulling in unnecessary baggage. I agree with that. They're actually on par. They needed 5 watts. Really? Keep your hardware below 60C. I guess if you're doing like a lot of work, like I have a Raspberry Pi that runs a few things and it's mostly idle, so it doesn't need a heatsink. There are additions in Rust, so if you really want to stay frozen in time, you don't move to any new addition. Yeah, you're using all those cores and the GPU. Yeah, okay, so maybe you do need the heatsink. Am I doing on time? It's 8:18. I haven't checked in a while, so let's do that. So git commit refactoring. So this was mostly adding models and app. Okay, so add extract move app to its own module. Move models. Move models and their renderer to their own module. That's basically it. Okay. Before I forget, let's send to move it. Back it up out of the virtual machine. All right. Anything more fancy needs a fan? Yeah. Anything more fancier than that needs liquid cooling. Here, there's some problems with the standard library not being addition based or something. Is that right? I don't know. I haven't heard of much standard library drama. Okay, the main is nice and clean now. How does the app look? The app has a lot of concerns. App's quite complicated. One of these standalone free functions could be put into their own module. Maybe. We're at 400 lines, so maybe that needs worked on. Models. There's this to do. Where do we use instances? Maybe I can break that out. Yeah, maybe the model shouldn't hold on to its instances. Maybe it should be the other way around. Maybe the instances should just track which model they use. And then maybe draw should just be given a reference to the instances. Yeah, okay. Is that again here? Yeah, what if I just move this out? It's owned where? In the app? Here. Cube model, ground model. It'll add to the state of the app's interior. So what I was thinking is like cube instance. And ground instance. So then I wouldn't call add instance here anymore. It would just be let cube instance equal. And let ground instance equal. Then add them here. Okay, and then advantages that our models don't need to be mutable anymore. Right, we don't use them. But we will as soon as I break this thing. If I just drop that completely and I get rid of add instance, then things will break, right? So nothing here, but the renderer breaks because it needs instances. So instead, we'll pass them in. Instances, model instances. I wonder if I can get away with not having a borrow on that. Pass. Let me put a to do here to investigate that later. See what lifetimes can be elided or restricted. Short, made smaller. Made smaller. Okay, and then it's just model instances. Okay, and then in the app, when I draw, I gotta actually make one. Self dot cube model, cube instance, and self dot ground instance. And then here, it's just cube instance dot update rotation. Right? Okay, I had a feeling I'd run into a problem here. Temporary dropped while borrowed creates a temporary. So we won't make it temporary. We'll pass it into draw, which means I need to make it generic again on the number of models. Which is fine, we have const generics, right? So this becomes not a borrow anymore, but one of these. And hey, it compiles again. Just like magic. There's some issues with... Oh, we have a panic. Hold on, I'm still reading chat. Can't make breaking changes to standard lib like they can in a language. Some issues, yeah, but the big issue is that they are struggling to add things like custom allocators to the standard primitives like vex. Is that because the vec sort of bakes in the allocator which to use? Occasionally worth looking at Rust GitHub under Rust 2 wishlist. Huh. Some really unfortunate things in where? In the standard library? But it's all nicely encapsulated, so I don't have to worry about it, right? Handling wgpu errors as fatal by... Okay, what? We had a validation error. Copy of something would end up overrunning the bounds of the destination buffer. How did that happen? By a write buffer. We can get a backtrace and see. All right, where did it happen? Very rare that I get a panic in Rust, but here we go. We got one. Write buffer. There. Where did it bring me to that line? Okay, here's where it was. Huh. Oh, is it assuming that the instances are side by side in memory? Buffer. There's the buffer. Instance offset. Oh, we didn't make the buffer big enough? The problem? Might be the problem, right? I think I might know what the problem is, so... Yeah, I see the problem. Okay. Little subtlety here, but you see how I iterated the ground and the cube separately? But for each one, I'm drawing a cube and a ground. So that's the problem. This has to be restructured. We can't independently iterate the models and the instances like that. That doesn't make sense. I think, what do we want to do? The model instance, right? It would be handy if it remembered which, it tracked which model came from. Can we share a reference, maybe? No, if we own both of them, then it's not wise to have a reference from there. But could I have like a, maybe have an ID or something? What if I have like models and I have like a hash map from a model type to model. So that replaces cube, model, and ground model. And then I could just have a model instances. Actually, why don't I just build it into model? So model with instances. Just have another structure here. So we have the model. And then we have the instances. And then we need a model type. mainly to organize them, but maybe I could use the string too. So just cube and ground for now. I have a feeling this is temporary. To hash map comes from standard collections. It's gonna need me to make that hashable, right? Is it not automatically hashable? Okay, anyway, so here it's going to be for model type model with instances in self models with instances, or just models. Okay, and then this will be model with instances.model. And this one is going to be model with instances. Selected an array, found a reference. All right, so we don't need it to be an array anymore. Can move it back to being a slice. Except for that. Actually, we can just say that we're passing in a slice of owned instances, right? That should work. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, and then when we construct things, we actually have to make the things. So I guess we'll do it here. Let models equal hash map new. So then we'll just put it up here. And do it this way, models model type cube equals model with instances model cube instances is just the cube instance. Oh, I have to do vec here, right? Right, I have to fix that. This is mutable, by the way. Models. Rid of that. Okay, then I do the same thing with the ground. Okay, to fix that, hold on. Okay, I still had an instant thing in there, so I need to get rid of that. All right, this got moved, removed that. Ah, yeah. So that we got to go into self.models index model type cube dot instances 0 dot update rotation. Yeah, this equal not satisfied. We need to derive equal on model type to resolve that, and we need to make it hashable, right? Clone plus copy clone. Hey there, cat peasant. You're the clone of Raymarch, huh? You want to learn some Zig, Stripe Monkey? I looked at it and I don't remember what I thought about it, to tell you the truth. So equals requires partial equal, right? And then don't we also need hash? Well, hash. Derive hash from it. Not assigned to data in an index of hash map. Oh, is it not? Is this syntax different? It's like dot insert or something. KV. Like that. Get my languages screwed up. Learn more than one programming language, you start to confuse them. So this we have to do like get or something, right? Get by the key. Can I just do that? That'd be nice. Have to borrow the key. But that I'm too lazy to do that, or not that I'm lazy. I think it's silly to take a reference to a trivial type like that. So let's make it clonable and copy. That should go away, right? No? It still wants a reference? I forgot. Oh, it's an option. Unwrap. What, get mute? Get mute. There we go. All right. We don't need the model type. Oh, then it's like just use values. Okay, fine. Self models.values. Okay. See if I fixed it. There's one thing that could go wrong, which did. We don't have the depth buffer set up right. So it's drawing the cube first and then the ground on top, and that's overdrawing the cube. Yeah, get what's a reference. And there's no way to make it automatically provide a reference. There's no trait that allows that to happen, right? There's no like auto ref. Wouldn't that be cool if there was? Like if you want a reference and you have a value, you can just turn it into a reference. Kind of like deref, but in reverse. Okay, so I have like a little bit less than an hour, so I can do actually a little bit of learning and actually learn how to implement the depth buffer to fix this problem. That way I don't have to worry about the draw order. Or I can just fix this by draw order. Let's fix it by draw order first, and then when I do the depth buffer, I can undo that work. So to have it draw in the correct order, how would I do that? I would need to like arrange the draws in a certain order by going to the, so like the instances, the model instance will have like a draw order. Let's make that I don't know, I32. Why not? Okay, and then this is where it gets a little complicated, right? Because in the model renderer, no, the app, where were we? The models? Not models. Guess it is here, right? It's what calls draw. It is the app. Okay. Yeah, right here. We have to first we have to sort them, but this is going to be a problem because draw takes a slice into a list of model instances that are owned. What if we turn this around and move the reference there? Actually make it an owned vector. Like that. So we'll construct vectors of references to model instances that go with a certain model as part of our sorting, and then when we draw them, we'll consume those vectors. So this would be into iter. So yeah, so we have to construct some kind of structure here. So I forget, in Rust, can you make a struct inside of a function? You can. Okay, good, great. So this is like a batch model is a can I imply the namespace or the lifetime like that? No, because there are too many lifetimes. How about I say it's the same lifetime? Okay, then we'll make a bunch of those. So a vector of them, right? That will end up sorting. Yeah. So problem is that we'll sort by draw order, but we also have to keep the models separated because they have different geometry. Let batches equal batch. Vector. Actually, it's a vector of batches. Vec new. Okay, so we're kind of duplicating this loop, right? What we're going to end up doing is we're going to say for batch in batches into iter. We're going to draw batch.model and batch.instances. Make sure that this compiles. We have to tell it that it's a vector of, oh, actually I can just do it with turbofish. That, right? Cool. So it compiles, but with some warnings, which is fine. So let me do the sorting first. So that's batch dot was it what is it called? It's like unstable sort or something like that, right? Unstable. How come it's not helping me? Is it vec unstable sort? go to the manual. Where's my manual page for Rust? Here it is. So stable sort. It's not unstable. It's stored unstable. And it's a method of slice. How do we use it? So I should just be able to call it sort unstable. Oh, batches. Had the wrong name there. Okay. Right, we have to implement ord for the batch. So that's no problem. We can do that. So missing members, and I have to have that there, right? Actually, can I just imply that? What's the problem? No, can't do that. What's the problem there? Can't compare. Partial ord is not implemented. Oh, is it partial ord? And then we can. Is it that we can derive ord, or do I have to have both of them? I can never remember this stuff. Let's see if we can derive it. No. So we have to implement partial ord and ord. And equal. So equal. We can derive that, right? Or can I? If I have partial equal. Can't. Okay, so we'll have to derive partial equal also. This feels like a rabbit hole that I'm descending into. Okay, what the heck? So I can't just derive equal? Okay. So we just claim that we implement it. We can't derive it though. Okay, so then how do we know that the models are the same? Yeah, beats me. I guess that we dereference both. Can't compare it. I'm surprised that we can't compare borrows. Why do I need to impl all of this? Because I want to sort them by depth. Oh, that's what I'm doing wrong. I need the depth. Or what did I call it? It's inside of here. Draw order. If I just put the draw order here, then the comparison becomes trivial. So here they're just the same. The batches are the same if the draw order is the same. So self.draw order equals other dot draw order. And this is self.draw order dot compare with other dot draw order. This one's different. Whoa. Yeah, I think we can just do this. Okay, all of that to sort unstable. Why does this give me a yellow line? More concise to loop over containers instead of using implicit iteration methods. So I can just say this then. Okay. I don't use the model. I will though, in a second, right here. Okay, so now it's just a matter of filling in the batches. So for all models with instances, we got to find a batch that has the model in it. It has the same, no, actually that's not true. It's for every, we have to have a nested loop. So for instance, and model with instances. Models or values, does that return references? Yeah. This I want to borrow. Okay. So we want to find a batch that has the same draw order, and I am going to want to compare models, aren't I? Oh, but I already have a model type. Maybe I should be using that instead. Where is it? App has the concept of a model type. Cube or ground. So if model knows what's type, that would help. Actually, we know the model type. So that's if I do this. Model type. Model. Let mute batch equal batches dot find. There's no find. Hey there, Endorn. Good morning or good evening. Ack. Ack. Ping. Pong. Vec. So I thought that there was a find in Vec. Is it that find is something in the iter? So it'd be like iter find. Ah, yes. So find batch or batch dot model dot batch dot model type equals model type, and batch dot draw order equals instance dot draw order. What type is instance? It's a reference to a model instance. Why can't I say that? What is the error here? Ew. Do you reference? What is this error? Raw order model instance is private. What? Fetch it back out. We just need a getter. Raw order given a self I32 self dot draw order. Something feels wrong about that, but we'll go with that for now. Oh, wait. Semicolon. The type of that is an option, right? So if let batch equal that, then we're adding an instance, otherwise we're making a new batch, right? So this is batch dot instances. What's the type of batch now? Let what's wrong with this? Do I just need to hit save and it'll update? Yeah. What's the type of batch now? Still an option? Is that because find returns? Okay, I don't know what find returns. I'm deep into the rabbit hole of trying to refactor some code to do the drawing order right now. Rather than actually add a depth buffer, I'm avoiding it at all costs for some reason. Find returns an option? Yeah, that's why I did a if let. Shouldn't that unwind it? I thought if, am I getting my languages confused again? I thought if let would unwind the option. So what, if there's no if let, then what is the type of batch? It's an option, right? So I thought putting if let in front would unwind the option. What am I doing wrong then? Why is it not unwinding the option? Oh, really? I had to put some in front? Oh yeah, so I am mixing up my languages. You know, you guys know what language I'm mixing this up with? Swift. In Swift, you don't have to do that. It's just, you say if let some binding, some name equal, and then it unwinds the optional. So you don't have to say some there. Yes, I'm just getting my languages confused. If a batch dot instances dot, yeah. So thank you, 715209. Coming to the rescue as usual. I want to push the instance. It is borrowed. Oh, iter mute. So that's implicitly a mutable. Right, so then otherwise batch is dot push batch. Draw order, we have that. Model, we have that. Model type, we have that. So it's all okay. Instances is a new vec with just the one instance we have so far. Okay. Thought it was up. Oh, we don't have it. So model order comes from the instance. Or draw order comes from the instance. Model, I thought we had a model. Expected a reference, and what's model? The model with instances. So I put the wrong name in there. So let's fix that. Dot model. Borrow it. Ah, okay. Now what is it telling me? Add a semicolon. Yes, sir. Okay, all that just to arrange our batches and then sort them by batch order, by draw order. So I actually need to get the draw orders correct, right? When we actually construct the instance, let's have a with draw order here. Self draw order, returning self self.draw order equals draw order self. Okay, and then where do I construct the models? Here we go. So scaled with draw order 1, and I guess I'll be explicit because why not? Withdraw order 0. So that should draw the ground first and then the cube on top. Nobody knows why C requires references. C, Rust, C++. C requires references because the size of things isn't fixed. What do you mean by requires references? If left sum works with any type, so I don't think it would make sense to let it unwind that way. Well, that's what Swift does, though. The way I wrote it initially wasn't because I'm learning Swift also, so that's how you do it in Swift. Is you just say if let name equals expression. I guess because Swift is more focused on the optional type, and Rust is more open in that it works with any kind of match, right? Float can be 32 or 64 bits. Yes, you could have single precision, which is 32-bit, or double precision, which is 64-bit. But what does that have to do with the references? I still don't get what you guys are talking about. C requiring references. So to test I got the draw order thing. If I put the ground up to layer, actually, let's just move the cube to -1. Now it should draw the cube first and then the ground on top of it. Go up. I need to go up further. I wish Rust had made everything into pointers. That's what I want, a C without references. But Rust went the other direction. Pointers make things unsafe because you have issues with concurrency, like two threads sharing having the same pointer to the same thing. You have issues with aliasing. If you can do pointer arithmetic, now you no longer know if the pointers are valid. So it kind of blows up the whole concept of memory safety, right? So you can use pointers only, but it's completely unsafe. It's up to the programmer to ensure the safety of the program. Cool. So my drawing order stuff, the rabbit hole has been filled. So can I get away with like not implementing that and just deriving it? No, because of those references. You can't automatically do it. But can I derive... guess I can't derive ORD either, right? For the reason that ORD can't be derived from partial ORD. Yeah, okay. So we had to implement all of them. Basically, it's a trick to say that we sort batches by draw order alone. If two different instances have the same draw order, it's arbitrary which one we draw first, so I don't care. So the complicated part, other than like the description of what a batch is, the complicated part was arranging batches, right? Because I had to reach down into the instances and look at the model type and draw order because they had to match. And if we already had a batch with a certain model at a certain draw order, we could batch them together, right? Otherwise, we had to add a new batch. You could have enum with 5 variants and use if let foo and if let bar and if let baz. You don't know what the user wants it to unwrap as type-wise. Yeah, but I'm just saying in Swift, like, the only type that if let works with is optional. So it's very narrow. So the unwrap is always on an optional. I understand with Rust, it makes sense that this is if let in Rust is more general. It's if this can have any pattern, right? It can have any type. This can have any type, and you might have any pattern here. So I could actually have if none, and that still works, although it's going to do the wrong thing, right? But Swift doesn't let you do that. You do it differently there. Actually, is there equivalent to this in Swift, like where I can use something other than option T on the right-hand side? I don't remember if there even is. So references are there to cover up 1632 64-bit architectures? No, references are there to borrow values, so to keep memory safety. So memory safety requires that you know what the lifetime of something is. You need to know how big it is. And there's probably some others, but those are the first two that come to mind, right? So the size of a float does matter because you operate on, the types are different, right, fundamentally. But also like where the float is, like how long is it going to be allocated? You mean in C? You have the same, here Tinsman, this is interesting thing. You have the same problems in C. It's just not the compiler's problem anymore. It's the programmer's problem. In C, you also need to know the size of your floats, and you need to know how long those floats live. So if it's on the stack, you can't return a pointer to it. Otherwise, you're just asking for trouble. If you want to return a pointer, you need that pointer to be pointing to the heap or static memory or something else that has a sufficient lifetime, although you're having to do it yourself and the compiler can't help you. Are references pointers? Not always, right? A reference could be compiled away. So it's no longer a pointer. I think that's why you had a kappa there, right? You want atomic memory. Arrays of 64-byte structures. Hey there, Rust compiler. And C, you can return values that outlive the function scope. They're called out of storage values or something like. Well, that's if you return a value. We're talking about pointers, though. You can't return a pointer that outlives stack context of the function without pointing into like popped values. Unless the pointer goes to static memory or something that was passed in. You could pass in a pointer in C and then like add to it. As long as you can guarantee that you're still within the bound of some buffer, you can pass the pointer back out and it's still valid. The point is in C, you still have to manage the lifetime, and that's still important even with pointers. No matter if it's a pointer or a reference, there's still lifetime issues, there's size issues. It's just how do you want it to be handled? All by the programmer, or do you want the compiler to help you out a little bit? Okay, I got maybe like 15 minutes left. I want to keep the structure local because it's tightly the concern of draw models to do this. But this does go away when I do depth buffer, right? So maybe that's just what I do. I'll try to add the depth buffer, and then if I do that, I can just drop this. I no longer have to draw things in order because I'll let the depth buffer figure it out. So I need to learn how to do the depth buffer. Let's learn. Let's go to the tutorial. I have that over here somewhere. Maybe I don't anymore. Oh no, here I do. The depth buffer. Here we go. Let's read about the depth buffer. What is a depth buffer? A good question. So they're having a similar problem where the draw order matters, right? Like this should be behind that, but it's in front because of the draw order. Models that should be in the back are getting rendered ahead of the one. So the same problem we just had, right? This is caused by the draw order. By default, pixel data in the new object will replace the old pixel data. There are two ways to solve this. Sort the data from back to front, which is what I just did, or use what's known as a depth buffer. So they talk about like you could just sort them by distance. That's what we did. But if we want to do it at a pixel level, that's where the depth buffer comes in. So the depth buffer essentially, once you draw to it, you draw a depth value. And then when you draw to the same pixel, but if it's behind what you already drew, you just don't do anything. But if it's in front, then you update the depth value to be closer, and then you overdraw. If you understand this correctly, ARM had the right solution with 32-bit back in 1991. Hardcode the sizes and you fix the nightmare? No. You only fix one problem. You fix the size problem, but you still don't fix the other problems with pointers and references. So you could have a 32-bit int, but you could have a 32-bit float. Those are two different types, even though they're the same size, right? 64-bit is completely wasting our time. No, I don't know what you're getting at with that question. 64-bit, why would it be wasting our time? You need 64-bit if you want more precision with your floats, or if you want larger values for your integers. If you have two 64-bit numbers as a struct, you can use a pointer or reference to pair instead of copying two values around. Or to pair. But it doesn't matter if it's two 64-bit numbers. You could have a Boolean. You could still have a reference or pointer to the Boolean instead of copying the Boolean around. Those two concepts are independent. You can always use two 32-bit. I don't know what this discussion is going around, but it sounds like we're mixing up terminology here. Fundamentally, a 32-bit number is 32 1-bit values, right? So are you just saying that you want the CPU to group them together, or do you want your program to make two 16-bit groups or one 32-bit group? You have to make a decision at some point. So if you choose a certain architecture, like 32-bit architecture, but you want a 64-bit value, you're going to have a struct of some kind with two 32-bit things that are paired together. You want to not have star ampersand in your C program. Then you don't want references or pointers. Just have everything be pure functions. Pure functional programming doesn't use pointers, right? Or maybe that's too broad of a statement. You'll have a lot fewer pointers and references if you make things pure functions. You can write your own compiler. Well, it depends on if not wanting to have it means you still have it, but it's hidden by the compiler. Or do you not want to have it as in you don't want to even have the concept of references and pointers? In which case, that's why I jumped to do pure functional programming. You don't need pointers and references if the way you manipulate data is it's always either a parameter or a return value. Just pointing out why pointers are used over copying values everywhere. Well, the core reason that you use pointers to avoid copying is that you store it in one place and then you tell everyone where it is, rather than picking it up and moving it to where it goes. You just tell everyone, I put it here. But then that opens up problems of concurrency and lifetime, right? How long is it going to be there? Who else knows about it, right? Versus if it's pure function programming, you don't have storage. It's very explicit. You have the value because I gave it to you as one of your parameters. You get the value back because I returned it to you. No other way around it. As an old C programmer, you're bemused by this conversation. I kind of feel like they're having their own discussion, but I'm trying to give my hot take on it. I like pointers because the atomic multi-core performance. What does that even mean? Atomic multi-core performance. Atomic means that something changes in an instant, right? It goes from one state to another instantaneously. There's no intermediate. Multi-core means you have different actors, so to speak, operating simultaneously, different CPUs, right? So what do those have to do with each other? I guess you're saying with multi-core, they don't have to worry about the order of like locking. They don't have, if there's only a before and an after state and no intermediate, you don't have to worry about two cores stepping on each other. If you program C++ for some time, you realize Rust rules are quite simple and make sense. That's been my experience, yeah. Cache lines. Okay, now you're throwing in yet another thing that's completely unrelated to atomic and multicore. Now you have cache lines. Cache lines are regions of memory in not the main memory, but in the cache memory that are read in by the CPU to improve performance. No, they're not. Cache lines have nothing to do with atomic or multicore. They're a separate concern. They're speeding up memory access. You can have cache lines without having atomic or multicore. I can have a single core, non-atomic stuff, and still have cache lines. Practice has nothing to do with how they're related. There's coincidence. Caches are used to improve memory throughput. Nothing to do with multi-core and nothing to do with atomic. You could say atomic and multi-core are related because if you have a single core, it doesn't matter if it's atomic, really, right? Because it doesn't matter if it takes 2 steps or 1 step, there's no problem. But with multi-core, it does matter because core 1 might get to step 2. Core 2 might assume you're still on step 1 and then bypass and you lose step 2. So maybe I'm probably just missing the context of what you're saying. You want 2 cores to access memory atomically without invalidating cache. So they're only going to read then, you're saying. Because invalidating cache, the definition of that is you're writing to the variable. So the cache is no longer valid, right? I'm just not understanding what you're saying, I guess. Yeah, I think I'm not understanding the context of what you're saying. Okay, draw models. I feel like I've been giving a lot of hot takes and not really understanding what Tinspin's saying, so it's not fair to Tinspin for me to keep talking about it. You're just trying to learn? Yeah, I don't want to give a hot take on what you're saying just because I don't understand what you're saying. But I do try to stay precise in my terminology. So when you say stuff like cache lines, atomic, multicore, I'm like trying to like say, well, how are you relating those? And I'm trying to fill in the blanks, I guess. And maybe not filling them in the same way that I should be. Okay, I got like maybe 10 minutes left. Oh, right. I was learning about the depth buffer, and I got really sidetracked. Depth buffer is a black and white texture. Well, that's not true. Oh, right away they say a falsehood. No, a depth buffer is a grayscale texture. So not just black and not just white, but levels of gray between them, which is implied by this one. They should say grayscale, right? Or they could say that is a one-dimensional texture, so it just has one value, not 3 RG and B. It just has 1. wgpu can use this when drawing new pixels to determine the order. So we make one how? We have to have an extent? Why? because texture descriptor takes an extent. Okay, so we're actually creating a texture. So we haven't done this before. So to create a texture, you go to the device and you say create texture. It takes a description. The description has a label, an extent, which has width, height, and depth layers. So we have one depth layer. MIP is, I forget what MIP stands for, but that has to do with like different zoom levels of the texture. So we don't need that. Sample count is how the texture is sampled. For anti-aliasing, we don't care, so it's 1. It's a 2-dimensional texture as opposed to like a cube map, which should be 3-dimensional. It's a depth format, so it's a texture optimized for use as a depth map. And it's attached to rendering, and it's also attached when we bind the texture. Why do we have to bind the texture? I wonder why. Oh, I'm glad I helped. I'm glad that we as a group helped out. I feel like I was more confrontational than I should have been. Black and white is a late term for monochrome, but it's not doesn't monochrome imply that it's one of two states, black or white? And doesn't the words black and white imply the same thing? Not sure what this has to do with pointers, since all single operations are atomic on single primitive values like ints and floats, which aren't often using that small of a value. Yeah. You really only need to worry about atomic. I can't even say the word. Whether something's atomic or not, if it has more than, if it has transitory states. So like a 64-bit float on a 32-bit architecture has the transitory state of you change the first half of it, but you haven't yet changed the second half. And during that transitory state, some other CPU core comes in and reads it. It's going to get a value that was neither what it used to be nor what it's going to be. It's some kind of in the middle of transitioning. So there, yeah, you'd want to either have an atomic way of updating it so that maybe you lock out all of the cores while you update the first half and then the second half. And that, sure, it does relate to cache lines in that you might, when you write half of the value, if that gets pushed out or, you know, and then something, it gets read back into cache, it could be wrong, I guess. Argumentation is the only path to aligning understanding. Yeah, I just don't want people. Some people get defensive, so I appreciate that you're not being defensive, and I didn't mean to be so confrontational about it. I guess I just naturally question terminology when I'm missing context. Okay, so we already did this, right? No, we did a create view for the surface texture. We didn't create a view for a texture we made ourselves. So we have to do that, and then we have to create a sampler. The sampler doesn't use the view, though. We need the texture view sampler together later. We need the depth format for when we create the depth stage of the... Okay, so we have to create a depth stage. A texture depth texture needs to be the same size as our screen. Okay, so that means on resize, we're going to want to update it. Since we're rendering the texture, we have to render attachment flag. Fine. Don't need a sampler, but a texture struct requires it. So I'm not going to create one because we don't need it. Because I don't have their texture struct. And I'm not going to sample it, so I'm not going to bother with that. So we can skip the sampler, which is nice because that's a lot of lines I don't need to type. So I need a view, and I need a texture, and we'll have to update the texture on resize. Yeah, I'm not going to have enough time to do this. I guess I'll do this tomorrow, but we can at least read about it. So we're going to create... So we're going to call that from when we're setting things up, probably the wgpu init. And then, okay, let's see where our render pipeline is. Where is that? That's in our render here. So here, we're going to modify this somehow. Probably where it says depth stencil, right? Yep, we're going to have some depth stencil state. We have the depth format. depth right enabled true, depth compare less, and a default stencil and default bias. Okay, cool. In fact, I can just copy this in now because this does not require anything non-static, right? I can just paste that there. Texture is a wgpu texture. Probably that's unnecessary. Okay, where does depth format come from? I guess I can follow this back to see where it goes. So it should just be wgpu texture type then. That should have worked, right? Why does that not work? Is it just wgpu depth format? Okay, does that work? Why not? Associated item. Oh, use wgpu texture. Okay, so texture not have depth format in it? Okay, having trouble here. So, oh, it's not here. Is this something that they declared in their own code? Texture. Okay, let's search the wgpu manual for this then. Depth, what is it? Format. Huh. So that doesn't exist anywhere in wgpu. So where are they getting that from? That must be something that they defined in their own program. Ah, here it is. Found it. We actually want this. I guess they defined it here because they use it there as well. So I suppose we should do the same thing. That makes sense, right? So probably where would that live for now? I guess we can just make it a constant of the render, or we'll move it up when we need to. Make it like, yeah, that's fine. Okay. Cool, and we can remove these markers. Okay, so now we're telling the, what is this, the render pipeline? We're telling the render pipeline that we promise to attach a depth buffer. Probably if I ran this now, it'll crash because we didn't actually attach one, right? You still miss the WoW streams on the alt channel though? Really? I didn't think anyone watched those, Tinspin. I mean, I guess I could stream them, but I just don't think anyone would watch them. Yeah, see, the validation failed. Incompatible depth stencil attachment format. The render path uses a texture with format none, but the render pipeline uses an attachment with a format some depth of 32-bit float. Yeah, so this is telling us the render pass needs to have a render texture attached. Otherwise, we will fail the validation step in the render pass coder, which I don't have enough time to do today, right? Because to do that, we actually have to make this texture and attach it. Let's see how they attach it. Var function, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and resize, we have to make it again. So we just call create depth texture again. It's the same, right? Create depth texture. Oh, no, they did create texture. Create depth texture is different. Oh, no, it's the same one. Create depth texture is the overall function here. So they have to redo creating the view as well. So every time we recreate the texture, we got to recreate the view for the texture. Okay. Got it. Do they need to clean up the view? Guess not. I guess it's reference counted. Make sure you update the depth texture after you update the config. If you don't, the program will crash as the depth texture will be different size than the surface texture. Okay. Okay, here we go. So in the render pass, we have to, here's where we attach the actual view. So I don't have that view yet. But when I do make it, then I'll have to attach it to the render pass through depth stencil attachment. So that'll be where I guess we start tomorrow. This none has to be something. And that's all we need to do. Okay. Need to do. And I really am out of time. I'll leave this for tomorrow. All right. So to make this runnable, I have to comment out the stuff that I just did, right? Let me think. That was when we did render setup, right? No, not render setup. I've already forgotten where it is. The power of undo will help me find it. Maybe? Nope. Power of undo fails me. Just search for depth. Here it is. Okay, so we'll make this none. Just so I can build it one last time, make sure that it works, it's in a working state. Okay. All right, so yeah. Already tired. I gotta go to work. Side effect of streaming before work, I guess. So yeah, unfortunately, my friends, I'm out of time. Let's go find someone else, and then I gotta go head off to work. Ooh, bald bearded builders learning Go from scratch. That sounds like fun. Let's go raid bald bearded builder. Okay, see you guys. Thanks 715209, Ootsby, Tinspin, Right Monkey, everyone else. I will see you guys tomorrow. Laters.